it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Greg and everyone that's here for inviting me. My name is Dave Secko, and I'll be moderating this final panel. Oh, we're moving forward. That little paper is very heavy. My name is Dave Secko, and I'll be moderating the panel this afternoon. It was a pleasure for Greg to invite me to help moderate, partially out of my interest in this. My background was, I was a microbiologist, was trapped in a small little room for a long time dealing with little amoeba that like to crawl one way or another, and it was our job to put little liquids on one side or the other to see whether they went left or right when we did that. But after finding that my life was maybe not as charmed, science wasn't exactly what I thought it was, the education that I received maybe wasn't exactly where I thought I'd end up being at the end of my PhD, and deciding where to go, I actually decided to stop and become a writer. And I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I decided to do it a lot earlier than I thought. I, from there, became a journalist and went on and ended up at Concordia University. And I have a deep interest, actually, in how we look at people being science literacy or not. My interest is through journalism, but I think it's going to be an interesting panel today to hear from our four distinguished speakers in terms of what they have to say about whether or not people are science literate, how we tell they're science literate, and whether or not the policies in Quebec actually support those types of views on science literacy. So that's what you're going to hear a little bit about. One snippet I'll say that Greg told me was that I was very interested in how this panel on some level got in. He let it slip that I got voted on last year, that this was one thing that the last conference was very interested in coming forward. So I'm very interested in what our four speakers are going to say. They have 5 minutes each to 7, depending on their, if they see me wave, will be up there. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker and allow him to introduce himself a little bit, so I won't say very much more than Tino Bordonaro, from the Secondary Social Science Consultant at the English School Board. He's also an adjunct professor at McGill University. Please come together to welcome him as he comes up here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start with a little gratitude and a couple of regrets, okay? First and foremost, thank you for inviting me for this opportunity. It's rare for me to address a room full of scientists, and on to my regret. It may actually be your regret. I am not a scientist. I am a social scientist, and I have addressed a room full of people before, but they're mostly pedagogues, educational administrators, school personnel, and school board personnel as well, okay? So that's my first regret. My second regret, and again, maybe yours, is that 5 minutes, thank God evolution did not have so little time, but I will try to fit as much of this as possible. And I do believe that there's a question and answer period afterwards, and I could follow up on anything during that question and answer period. I do teach policy. I am a policy analyst. I do teach policy here at McGill University. That's how I moonlight, because during the day, during most of my time, I am a consultant at the English Montreal School Board, and I'm often at the receiving and delivery end of policy. And of course, this is mostly, if not entirely, educational and school policy. I will primarily address, or rather answer 2 questions during this address, okay? How does educational reform happen in Quebec? Very interestingly, and what does it mean to be science literate today? Well, I'll give you some background or an outline that is both based on the social sciences as well as the science program here in Quebec. Okay? This is what educational governance looks like in Quebec. It's complicated, it's embedded, it's a hierarchy, okay? This is what the principals are constantly contending with. This is what school policy or educational policy has to be aware of. I did put some emphasis on the provincial level. The Education Act is in fact the act or law that governs education in this Quebec. It is an act of assembly that is passed by the Legislative Assembly and then administered or executed by the bureaucracy or the Ministry of Education, known here in Quebec as the Ministry of Education, Leisure and Sports, okay? Or MELS as we abbreviate it to. From there, the boards write the bylaws. From there, the schools write the rules. And of course, this is all under the regulatory framework of the Canadian Constitution and any other act or law passed by the Legislative Assembly. Although it's very difficult to know where to begin, we could begin at the very start, bang, but beyond that, we have to begin with the first evidence of an education system in Quebec. This was during the French regime. There was plenty of education before the French regime. In fact, in many ways it was superior. It was carried by the elders. It was a very wise education experience for those who received it, but it wasn't a systematic one, or it wasn't a system. The French regime introduced to this land a very institutional education system, okay? Entered the British regime and it became two institutional systems. We call them dual denominational, or based on two religions, and this stood the test of time up until 1997. So this dual denominational or two institutional religions lasted or stood the test of time. But I'm going to fast forward to 1960, because in 1960 is the year that Bill 60 was passed. 1964 rather is the year that Bill 60 was passed, and this is when educational governance was unified. There was one governing body. It was at the time the MEQ, or MEC, Ministry of Education, Quebec, Ministère de l'Éducation du Québec. Okay, it was the MEC, renamed the MELS, and in just about after the year 2000, I can't remember exactly when. And now we had a governing body across the board, and no longer a dual denominational system or two religious institutions at the governing level. Fast forward, because a lot happened between 64 and 79, but fast forward to 1979 and Bill 71 was passed. Bill 71 did for curriculum what Bill 60 did for governance. In other words, it centralized it, it unified it. In 1979, we had one curriculum for English and French schools from grades 1 to 11, or secondary 5, or the last year of high school in this province, okay? In 1988, with Bill 107, a very important law or piece of legislation was passed, introducing to the system the concept of school orientation, the concept of school character, the concept of a school being an entity on its own. One of the criticisms of Bill 71, or the curriculum, or otherwise known as the educational project, one of the criticisms was that it created a homogeneous or a system of education where you couldn't really distinguish or differentiate one school from the other, and this had its drawbacks. So in 1988, the concept of the school orientation, of a school developing its own character, personality, institutional of course, but nonetheless one to call its own. In 1997, by way of Bill 180, we continue to further decentralize our education system with the introduction of a school body or school governing board. These school governing boards exist until today. Furthermore, in 2002 with Bill 124 and 2008 with Bill 88, more emphasis, more focus is being given to the school, allowing schools to develop their own policies, all within the framework, the regulatory framework that I have shared with you already. All right, on to question number 2, is there literacy in the social sciences? Is there literacy in the science? Well, in fact, literacy is important in all subjects at all levels. In fact, the policy, the rule, the law in this province is in the youth sector, so elementary and secondary. The policy, the law is that everybody is responsible for literacy and the quality of the language. In fact, fundamental to any student's education is 2 skills, and they are, of course, literacy and numeracy, and I could say just about the same thing for numeracy. All school professionals are responsible for both literacy and numeracy. There have been a set, there has been a new program in all the subjects introduced in 79, that was Bill 71, and revisited, renewed, reestablished in 1977. The emphasis, as of very recently, has been on both the acquisition of knowledge and the application of knowledge. This applies as much to science, as social science, as math, as English, and so on and so forth. In other words, we want our graduates and we want our students in school to know something and know what to do with it, which is being generally widely well received. And of course, this is not possible without allowing the teachers to exercise their professional judgment and expertise, and this was reinforced not just in how we teach the subjects, in how we teach the curriculum, but also in how we evaluate. And I'd like to say a few more words about evaluation, but I can see but that my time is scarce. So, this is what the social science, in fact, this is the grade 10 history curriculum. This curriculum has been in the news recently because of the exam on June 15 of 2012. But this is what the curriculum looks like. It's very circular, but actually it's not. The top half is the preamble, if you like, mostly taught in secondary 3, and the bottom half is, in fact, what is taught in secondary 4 and examined at the end of secondary 4. But I know what you're waiting for, and it's this. This is what the science program looks like. Now, I don't expect you to read all of this, and then again, if you wish to, I could find some way to get it to you. But it is very categorical, if I may say, as opposed to circular, okay? But this is the acquisition of knowledge, this is knowledge, and this is its application. In the social sciences, we have 3 competencies, okay? The first is, or the emphasis is on knowledge, the second is on its application, and the third, a reference to citizenship, is what I call civics, or the reason or raison d'etre for having a social science program in total or as a whole, okay? You'll notice that in science there are also 3 competencies. I'm less familiar with these, I don't work with them very, very closely, but there they are. And again, the concept of knowledge and its application, or of content and competencies, is just as evident in science as it is in the social sciences. And in fact, if I were addressing a room full of mathematicians writers, literate, so to speak, I'd be showing you 2, 3, or 4 competencies. That is the application of this knowledge. I believe I'm out of time. And if you have any questions, well, I've answered 2, but if you have more questions, I believe there's a panel afterwards, and I will gladly answer them. Thank you for your undivided attention.
All right, I want to introduce Sylvia. Did I get it right? Pretty close. All right, from Dawson College, and in particular, a researcher in biology instructor. And I'm very interested in hearing your talk on being science literate in the 21st century. Are Quebec's educational policies effective? And I think it's going to play out very well as the first talk.
Yes, because I'm going to disagree with you.
I mean, that's what I like to hear, because it'll make it fun of the thing. I think we're going to...
Again, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me on this panel. I was really excited about being invited. Okay, I want to focus on 3 aspects of the work that I've done in the past years. Now, the date, this research was finished in 2010, so maybe it's not quite up to date, though I think it is. I'm basically going to talk about 3 aspects. The Quebec Educational Mathematics and Science Alignment Project Experience. This was a 3.5-year project that was done in collaboration with MELS, looking at the alignment of the high school science programs with the SEICHEP science programs. Some preliminary SEICHEP observations on Quebec educational program students, and then a small discussion on what we mean by science literacy. Okay, CASA was funded in 2006, and basically MELS met with a couple of representatives from the SEICHEPs to develop a proposal. And so we developed this proposal together to basically ask the question, with the reform, how are the students going to go from the high school program to the SEICHEP program with as least disruption as possible? Do the 2 fit together? And it was subsequently funded by the Quebec Federal Entente. And it was quite interesting because whenever we met with our Francophone colleagues, they were very envious of us, because one of the major policy deficits in Quebec is there's no discourse between high school science teachers, college science teachers, and university science teachers. We operate in different silos. And so this is a really interesting opportunity to talk about science education globally. And I think it was one of the major outcomes of the study. Our mission was to foster a community of educational stakeholders. So to this end, We had representatives from industry, from the space agency, from the pharmaceutical agency, from unions, from school boards, etc., meet together on a regular basis and hammer out what we meant on small concepts in science as well as big concepts. And we were basically looking at the coherence of science across the system to Seiler. We didn't include university science. And we looked at science and math. Our partners were all the Anglophone school boards, all the Anglophone Seicheks, as well as Bishop's University and McGill University that came in at the end. And I have to say, this was more than partnerships on paper. We met regularly. We paid to have high school teachers come from the Eastern Township school boards, from the Western Quebec school boards, etc., and work together on a regular basis. And that was really important, because you can't collaborate unless you can work together and hammer out differences. Okay. Our goals were to describe the coherence and alignment of the curricula between the two systems. And this was a detailed analysis. We had the high school teachers come and say, this is what we did. This is what we're doing on a particular concept. We went through all the MELS documents, pulled out those tables that talked about the content, and asked the teachers, what do you do about this content? What does it mean to you? On the other hand, we also went to the Seiler teachers and asked them, and we asked every single program that uses science or math as a prerequisite, what are your expectations that the students will know and can do on an item-by-item basis? We looked at 300 plus different concepts and compared them. We also met regularly to hammer this out. We also communicated the QEP to the Seiler faculty, because like I mentioned before, there's almost no discourse, and there were a lot of misconceptions and a lot of misunderstandings between the teachers of the two levels. And we also tried to look at an overview, to look at the coherence of science. And a fifth point that I haven't added here, because we put this at the end, we decided at the end that we needed to prepare materials together, learning evaluation situations. So we set up 10 teams of 3 Seiler teachers and 3 high school teachers to develop learning evaluation situations. We did some on electronic waste, on water treatment, on developing a sledge for the Paralympics for hockey, etc. Now, this was extremely interesting, because we had high school teachers and Seiler teachers working together. They met weekly to develop something. And what we found out was that the high school teachers tended not to have a really good, complete understanding of the science, okay? Not in an organized, structured manner. And that needed help on that. The Seiler teachers were absolutely lousy. I'm so embarrassed at presenting material. We produced 10 pages of typed text for the high school students to understand on late-emitting diodes. The high school teachers looked at that and said, forget it. And so our collaboration was really important to have us understand each other's perspective and respect from each other. And we were both absolutely necessary. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I'm running out of time. There are 4 aspects of the QEP that presented problems to the Seicheks. Okay? In science and in math, there are multiple paths to completing science and math. There are 3 math, 2 science paths. The intention was that they would be equivalent in content, but they'd be different in terms of teaching style and method of evaluation. Okay, this presented problems because in effect, you can't cover the same content if you're using very different pedagogies. The time doesn't sticks. There's a focus on the development of student competencies rather than on the attainment of specific disciplinary knowledge. Okay? And that's a problem for SEISA teachers. Then the disciplinary knowledge was integrated in learning evaluation situations, which meant it was very contextually rich. Okay? And we believe this is a matter of research that needs to be done, whether when you learn the content within a very powerful context, you can abstract from it. Okay? I don't know that that is possible. And it's an evaluation for learning, not of learning. Almost finished. Okay. Subsequently, at Dawson, we ran a survey in March of this past year on what faculty saw in terms of the students' performance relative to what it was before the reform. We had 192 teachers that responded. These are the questions here. Okay. The results are interesting. No discernible differences in academic performance pre-reform and post-reform. No discernible differences in retention rates. No significant differences in a forced choice inventory on physics, which is a standardized test on concepts. Okay? So no differences in terms of academia. However, there were differences in that the students felt that they were not prepared for college. Okay? They had questions especially about the disciplinary knowledge in chemistry. Also, there was a huge increase in students going to the academic skills and asking for specific help in science. This is good. Students were saying, I don't really understand this, I need help, where do I get resources, etc. So this is necessarily negative. So we saw differences in how they learned. I lost the slide. In terms of, these are the aims of the Quebec educational program. And I just put up two definitions of literacy. I think the QEP really promotes the first definition. Scientific literacy is the knowledge and understanding of scientific concepts and processes required for personal decision-making, participation in civic and cultural affairs, and economic productivity. That is really important. And that's what I think the QEP does really well. Okay? That's what it's meant to do. However, in SEISA, and I think from this morning's discussion, there are other definitions of scientific literacy or science literacy that are required. This one, science literacy is the knowledge, skills, and attitudes deemed essential to careers as professional scientists, engineers, and technologists. This addresses the question about the transfer of knowledge to practice. Okay? This requires a different type of literacy. And that's a job of the SEISAs and universities. But in order to arrive at it, you need to have more collaboration between secondary schools, colleges, and universities. Okay. Basically, there's three different types of definitions that I found in the literature on science literacy. The last one, values and beliefs and actions or habits of mind. It's just showing up now. And so I want to leave you with a question. What education will promote the transformation of knowledge to innovations? Okay. The reason I'm asking that is when I meet my students, okay, they know science. They know the scientific method and can critically think about science. They're not so good at the attitudes. Okay. A lot of students have problems with the workload in science. Their response, 40 to 50% of students is to cheat. Okay. That talks about an attitude towards science. When you give them a really difficult problem to work on, they often give up. Okay. They don't have persistence. They don't seem to have some of the values that we associate with science. And so that's one of the things that I want to raise. How does one get our students to develop the habits of mind that are embedded in science, that require hard work, suffering, etc., low salaries? If any of you are graduate students, you know that. I don't know whether we're teaching our students that aspect of science literacy. Thank you very much.
I'm going to introduce, and I can see this already ramping up, so we're ready for a final two very interesting ones. I'm going to introduce Dr. Johanne Patry, who's an expert in education and pedagogical approaches to science, and is going to take us through her view on all this. And are we looking for more discussion? More? Okay, all right. Take it up. Take it away.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not tall. So, well, I wanted to say thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor. And I want to say also bonjour, good morning, or good afternoon, konnichiwa. Use all the languages, ni hao. I said there were some people, and buenos dias at the same time. Okay, first, I want you to know that my view of education is from birth to another plane of existence, okay? So this is my view of education. Science literacy, total pure science literacy you will never get, okay? It's lifelong learning about science, which is about the universe. So this summer, as I was preparing for this presentation, I was thinking about books. I was reading some books, and I decided to kind of conduct my presentation according to certain principles or books that I have seen or read in the past. The first one was The Grand Design from Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinov, okay? And it was very interesting because this morning Monsieur Lachance mentioned the vision, okay? We have to have a vision. So the grand design is a vision. So if we look at the grand design, we have formal and informal education. If we look at the formal education, with the renewal, the pedagogical renewal, we went from a teaching paradigm to a learning paradigm. And mainly, a lot of the changes that were done for the moment were done from K to 10, 10th grade, or Sec 4. It's mostly to build a kind of general science and technology culture. Also, we want to build learned citizens. Okay, it's all in the grand design. And we want to develop people who can express opinions so that they can make choices, okay, especially politically. And on the science side, there is a strong environment component that we have noticed. So when we talk about the sustainable development that we did talk earlier, well, it fits very well in this. Là, j'espère qu'il n'y a pas gelé. Okay, continued. However, with this renewal, we found that just at the secondary level, we have lost 100 hours at the secondary level for the same content, the same volume of content, okay? And if we look at the PISA, oops, it doesn't go to the bottom. When we look at the PISA, we had very good results, okay? But we have to remember that the PISA was done in 2009. That was before the 15-year-olds were through the reform. And even today, those who are really of the reform are in about Sec 2, Sec 3, okay? That they really went through I wouldn't say better, but a transformation. So also in the informal education, I work also in the informal education. There are no real policies, no real policy. There is little participation in evaluation also. So we have a whole bunch of groups going around that do presentations for the public, for students in class, but there is no evaluation by no one, okay? So we don't know if what they're saying is good. And if you look at a primary school teacher, how can he know or she know? They're not an expert in science. So they have to take everything as face value. So, and also the informal education is very ministry dependent. For instance, the MDE, okay? They have to get funds for help. And I do know that because I'm chair of Science on Stage Canada. And this is a pan-Canadian organization, which is part of a cluster, you know, we were talking about clusters, which has its seat in Europe, Science on Stage Europe. So we have Science on Stage Canada, Science on Stage Poland, Italy, anyway, we have a whole bunch. But still, in the case of Science on Stage Canada, we work with teachers mainly, because when you reach a teacher, you reach thousands of students, okay? That's something that people don't think about. They just think about reaching the students, but reach a teacher and you're going to reach thousands, okay? So Another thing that did inspire me with my readings about quantum mechanics, which I don't understand, by the way, there's the M theory, model theory. It's a theory about many realities who can help explain the universe. Okay, so that's why I have kind of this fucked up image. Okay, so in this case here, I want to emphasize realities check or reality checks. Okay, so what it should be, okay, what the science policies should be here in Quebec. Learning should be contextualized, hands-on, minds-on. Differentiated learning. We should have also experiential learning. It should be engaging. It has to be based on facts. Got to be scientific, okay? And it's got to be inspired by everyday life, okay? It has to. We want to get people, not just students, but adults also interested in science. Look at all the programs you can see on TV, especially when you go. My favorite is Discovery Science, okay? You have a whole bunch of shows about technologies, food tech, mechanics. And I see people around me who are very interested in those shows, even students. Okay, I'll just continue. What it is, this is the reality, okay? What it is, multiple realities of how science should be taught and learned, okay? There are multiple realities. So not everyone works the same way. Different interpretation of the QEP, if it is read at all by the teachers. No pain, no gain approach. You have to suffer, okay? There's still the classical approach, traditional, all in line in the classroom, okay? And past Sec 4, you go in science and you don't have a life anymore, okay? And students today want to have a life. Okay? They don't want to be like Isaac Newton, who had a very bad temper. They don't want to be the shy Einstein. They don't want to be. They do want to research. They do want to know. They want to get engaged. And they want to have family. And they want to have friends. Okay? My own daughter went from science to arts and letters because she wanted to have a life. Okay? So, any else? Well, do you know this book? Yeah. Life, the Universe, and Everything? Well, that's about the program we have in science. The curriculum. Broad areas of learning. Your context, you know, to build the awareness. We have worlds. We talk about materials, earth and space, living and technology. But is it skimming the surface? I have a lot of teachers who come to me, yeah, but we should go deeper in this concept. Yeah, but you don't need, that's not what we want. That's not what the program wants. That's not the grand design. And is it everything? Because they've put everything apart from quantum mechanics. Okay? But they should do that in the next reform. So we have to remember also the common framework. There is, from 1997, a common framework to which all provinces participated to put together this common framework, but Quebec. Okay, I won't go into this. And we have also clashes among the teacher corps. They disagree. They disagrey on how science should be taught, how it should be learned. Okay, they do disagree, so we have a lot of discussion. So, to end here, there was another book I saw, Everything Forever. I don't know if you know this phrase. The more it changes, the more it's the same. Well, Sylvia, you were talking about you don't see much difference anyway. The success of Quebec science literacy policies, they depend on making sure that the curricula is applied in the classroom, because for the moment, you don't know what they're learning. How they're learning, you don't know. You can't know, because the teachers are not evaluated. I'm sorry, I'm a pedagogical counselor, so I've seen good and very bad. So, and I've seen dinosaurs as well. So, teacher dinosaurs. So we have to ensure also that pre-service teachers get a rich initial training in science and technology, especially at the primary level. Did you know that the kids that come in Sec 1 in science and technology have a level of 3rd grade primary? So can you imagine how many steps they have to climb? And can you imagine how boring they find science when they get in Sec 1? Because the program is built it assumes that the student comes with a background from the 6th grade, but they come with a background from the 3rd grade. Okay? No wonder they hate science. We have to promote professional development for teachers for all levels, but we have also to develop this culture that it is important for one to learn more. Even if you're a teacher, you have a bachelor's degree. I've had some people, teachers, who told me, I don't want to do more. I have a bachelor's degree, that's enough. No, it's enough. It's not enough. You have to continue learning. The mechanics at Canadian Tire has to have training. Why can't you? Okay? So, also we need the teachers, everybody, we all need to stay in the science game. Okay? Science is advancing. We should say science and technology are advancing. So teachers have to know. I remember when I started to teach in 1980, I had to explain to my students what was a TV, you know, the cathode thing, okay? Now I have to explain what an LED is, what the plasma TV is. If I can't do that, I'm a dinosaur, okay? So, and I think that what will promote better education, scientific literacy, or at least working towards science literacy, is by working in learning every day and not become a dinosaur. So I thank you very much.
Head on to our final talk, and then we'll open it up for questions and for discussion, and go from there. So we'll probably turn the monitor off. Yeah, good if it's possible. I'm going to introduce Dr. Gale Seiler. Seiler, I got Associate Professor at the Department of Integrated Studies and Education at McGill University, who I hope is going to pull some things together for us, maybe a little bit. No? Lead us in a new direction?
No,
Pull together, okay. We'll pull together a little bit, and then we'll ask all the panelists to come up front, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Woo, tough to go last. No. So I'm a professor here in the Faculty of Education, Department of Integrated Studies and Education. Just to tell you a little bit about myself so you can kind of see where my perspective on this is coming from. I'm gonna check my time, okay? I have a bachelor's and master's degree in biology, plant ecology, and then a PhD in science education. In between there, between finishing my master's and getting my PhD, I taught high school science for 17 years in the US and a bit in South America, but basically in the US. So now I work in a position where I prepare future teachers. So I teach courses and work closely with pre-service teachers and in-service teachers, but mainly with pre-service teachers. So people who are becoming teachers, elementary teachers, secondary science teachers. So my interest clearly lies in classrooms, in what happens in schools, in classrooms, because that's where I've spent most of my adult life, in science classrooms. So I'm maybe going to shift a little bit in that direction and thinking about some of these bigger issues in terms of what happens in classrooms. There's a famous, famous in her circle, educational anthropologist called Barbara Holland, and paraphrasing her, she says the long term happens in day-to-day interactions. So by that meaning, and then kind of applying that to science ed, that whether kids go into science, whether kids succeed in science, whether students see themselves as being able to identify with science and wanting to pursue science, happens in day-to-day things that happen in their classrooms and elsewhere in their lives as well, but in that ongoing, layer after layer after layer of their identities and how they see and feel about themselves, and in relation to science. And that is something that is important in thinking about what happens in classrooms. So what does that have to do with policy? Well, if you think about what policy is, I looked it up just to get an official definition. A course of action or plan intended to influence decision and actions. So as teachers, both at, I work with teachers at, elementary, secondary, and now even with teaching assistants and instructors at the university and CJEP on a project that Sylvia is also involved with. We often encounter policy kind of coming up against the day-to-day work of teachers and what they're trying to do in the classrooms. So the reform, the Quebec reform, the Quebec educational program, which has been in existence for about 15 years now, plays a role in that. That's an important policy that shapes what happens in classrooms between teachers and students every day. The QEP is kind of like a tale of two cities in my mind. I think it has tremendous potential, as some of the other speakers alluded to. I think that it could do a lot toward advancing scientific literacy. It's built on the idea of success for all. You may not know that it really grew out of concern for the incredibly high dropout rate in Quebec. So Quebec is also kind of like a tale of two cities, because although we place very high on these international measures of achievement in science, the PISA and the TIMSS and some others, Quebec has a very, very high secondary school dropout rate, still. So that's where the reform came from. So, that's an important context. So the reform was designed to promote, a quote, success for all. The idea of formative feedback that I believe Sylvia mentioned, evaluation for learning, to give students formative evaluation so that they can improve their learning, is built into the QEP. It takes a constructivist approach. There's opportunities for students to engage in doing science. It attempts to break down the silos between science so that physical science is incorporated with life sciences and so on, which I think can potentially lead to greater innovative ways of thinking about things if we can break down those silos in science. Some of the earlier speakers today, I think, would agree with that. It takes an authentic view of the nature of science and the way knowledge is constructed in science, and it tries to give students a feel for that, as opposed to science just being a book of facts. It recognizes the intersections between culture and science and the importance of placing learning into the student's context. It's focused on competencies, which, again, based on what you've seen here, could potentially lead to good, solid, very broad, powerful idea of scientific literacy. And I believe it has potential for engaging students who are traditionally shut out of science, because my own research interest is in student populations that are underrepresented in science and how we can change science instruction to change that situation. And I think the QEP has potential for doing that. That said, that's not really what's happening. Again, as some of the other speakers alluded to. So there's this other side that the teachers are coming up against every day in their classrooms, not really understanding the QEP, because it's radically different. It really is radically different than many other provincial and national curriculum. So not really understanding, having inadequate preparation. So that's another part of policy. So the documents itself that lay out the philosophy and the actual curriculum are policy, but then other policies are provision of professional development and working with the teachers to understand what they're expected to do. I also think that there's a missing link in the QEP between the competencies and the progressions of learning. So the competencies are those three things, which I can read to you if you want to recollect them later in our discussion. And they're really what they want students to be able to do with the knowledge that they have. And then the progressions of learning is kind of like that chart that Tino showed you that lists all the topics. Way too many, because the scientific knowledge has just mushroomed in recent years, and they've just kept adding pages to the textbook. So there's way too many topics, and then there's these very broad things that they want students to do with the knowledge. But what's missing in between there is what are the big ideas that we want students to take away from this. And teachers have to figure that out for themselves, and that's not a trivial task. And teachers really haven't been prepared to do that. The last thing that creates problems for the QEP, I believe, in science is the assessments. The assessments, the provincial assessments, are very traditional, content-based multiple choice or small, short, open-ended questions. They basically assess information, not really understanding and big ideas and underlying concepts. And I don't know if you remember when, some of you are probably too young, but when digital publishing software first became available, this saying came into common usage. What you see is what you get, and that was really important, that what you saw on the computer screen was what you would get when you would print it out. It wasn't always like that. But if you think about that in terms of education, we can change that and say what you test is what you get. So although the QEP is challenging teachers to teach in all these innovative ways that really would lead to rigorous scientific literacy that we would want for our citizens, the way it's being tested does not align with that. And everybody knows it. The teachers are always commenting on it and worried about it and complaining about it, but in many cases, that's what drives what they do, more than the QEP. So that's an example of, I think, the policies not fitting together, and it's creating huge problems for the students. Let me just say one last thing, just about the emphasis, something else I hope will come up in our discussion, the emphasis on how Canada and Quebec do in the international assessments. I'd just like to put out the idea out there that while that's important to consider, it's also important to consider kind of what that emphasis either hides or what it, kind of like the hidden things that that emphasis does. Okay, so maybe that's something we can talk about as well. Thank you very much.
We can get ready with their questions. I'm going to open it up straight to the floor and go from there instead of all you guys listening to me. Are these on? Is on? All right. So is there an initial question? Please, let's open it up. And I have some questions when we get there, but I'd really like, at the end of the day, for people to take up some of these ideas.
Well, this is both a question and a comment. So I think for those of us who are social or natural scientists, I think the reason that we are scientists isn't because we had this natural motivation to become a scientist, but rather because somebody led us into this path. And the importance of mentorship, I think, is really critical in any kind of career development, because you need that person to guide you through the understanding of the natural world. Now, when you do build that relationship with a mentor, especially in biology and ecology, you realize that we actually know how to party and we know how to have fun, and that these intellectual interactions are part of what keeps us going and that motivates us and educates us. But I want to know to what extent science education is really underscoring the fact that it's a process as much of an understanding of the natural world, but actually an understanding of self-discovery. You know, it's not that we have to force upon people the eyes of a scientist or the eyes of how to critically think about the world, but that's what makes us human, is the ability to understand, the ability to think and to ask questions, and this natural drive to understand and to discover. For many of us who are in science, like I said, there were these role models that we've had either in our personal relationships or these amazing scientists like astronauts and discoverers that we look at as examples of what we can aspire to. But largely, it's this understanding that we are born with these traits that drive us to understand. And I want to know how we can better allow children and young students and young scientists to say it's as much of a process of understanding the world as it is a process of understanding who we are.
Thank you very much. Gale, do you mind starting off and getting into this? And feel free for the panel as well to dig into some of the other ideas they talked about. Mine doesn't sound to be on, but...
Are these on?
Yeah, they're on?
They are.
Okay. They don't sound from up here, but you're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, very, very important. And the short answer is no, we don't. We're not doing that enough. Really, we're not doing that well at all. really at any level of education, in my opinion, from elementary, where I think it's really important, because I think that's where that curiosity is still so vibrant, and wonder about the natural world. And I think very readily that gets shut down by a focus on science as information to be transmitted and then regurgitated, to be honest. And those of us, you're right, that we're lucky enough to be able to go into science and find a place for ourselves there, somehow worked around that. Whether it was through mentorship or just something about, us just enabled us to find these pockets of curiosity and sustain that. But for many youth, it's not sustainable because of the really oppressive way that science is taught, in my opinion. Some of us, all of you here, obviously were successful in some way in that model, but think about all the people who are not here, who didn't even persist in school because of often the way science and math were taught to them.
Yeah,
Can
Sylvia,
I just
who's
add to that? I can't believe it. In 2012, I still have a fight every year with a lot of my colleagues who insist that students have to write lab reports in the passive voice with no personal pronouns. And I keep on arguing, no, science is a human activity. Even scientific journals now say that people should be able to write in the active voice, that there's a subtle but important difference. When you put everything in the passive voice, you're removing yourself from the activity. I still have that fight every year. So yes, I agree with Gale that somehow we keep on pushing the idea in science that science is objective, that there's no place for individual emotions, passions, etc. As a biologist, I disagree with that.
Joanne, who's not here, and comments to this line of discussion?
That's Spock science. I call it Mr. Spock science. Okay, no emotions. But to answer the how, I find that from birth, it has to be simulation and stimulation all the way through death, okay? So that's how we can get the students, well, everybody, any human being, to be interested in the world around them. However, in my capacity as a teacher and also as a pedagogical counselor, I have met very good teachers and not so good teachers. And there's one thing that I did see is you have people who teach, people who love teaching, and people who are passionate about teaching science. And I noticed what is common among all the good, very good teachers, they're passionate, okay? And often I've been told by students, oh, well, I didn't want to go into science because I had Mr. Hotel, and he never smiled. A student told me that last April about the teacher, a woman teacher he had the previous year. I've seen students with a gorgeous science potential, gorgeous, but they were kind of clobbered the next year in Sec 5 by a unemotional person, a teacher, and so the student just left. Okay, and a few years later, I see her at a receptionist's desk at a hairdresser place. I was just flabbergasted. I said, what are you doing there? You've got a big brain. Why? I found it unfair. Oh, she said, well, you're the one who believed it. Yes, I do, and I still believe it. So you see, so it's important. It can't, instead of saying teachers, I should say instead educator, because each one of you is an educator. Okay, we educate ourselves, but we educate others as well. So I don't remember who said that, but the Earth is a global village, and it takes a village to raise children. So we're all part of it. So to be able to help the kids, well, we have to keep doing it. Who was saying this morning? We have to persevere, continue, bite the bullet, and just go ahead and think about the success and the wonder. Have you ever seen a child finding something wonderful? The face they have? Well, you've had that face once, or many times, I hope. But this is what you have to work for, and you know you're on the right track.
Can you bring it back to policy for us and how this connects back to are we even meant to find these things in some of the discussion you guys were talking about?
I may make some reference to policy, but I do want to say this. Every subject, every discipline, and every profession has its stigma attached to it. I mean, we have opinion, we have prejudices, we have biases, and, if you decide to become a scientist, well, that, comes with a set of understandings, misunderstandings, or prejudices. Same thing if you want to become a mathematician or an historian. I mean, you can imagine somebody who says, I'm going to grow up to be an historian, and, if it makes that person or you happy as scientists, I mean, that's what's really most important. Yes, the passion and to love what you do, and if you love what you do, you will be sociable as a result. Now, bringing it to policy, it is in part the policy, within reason, of course, but it is in part the policy in this province that teachers are specialists, but at times required to be generalists as well. And I work with teachers who, to fill their schedule or to fill a hole in a schedule, are asked to teach history or geography or one of the social sciences, and they say to me, listen, I haven't been trained, I don't even like history, and what do I do? And my advice is, learn to love it for your sake, and especially your students. Fake it if you have to, and then I always follow up, and a lot of them come back to me and say, I took your advice reluctantly, I took your advice, and it's not that bad, and I'm learning to like it, and no, they may not go so far, but I assume that they're happier for it, so, that's for what it's worth my advice to you in the context of policy.
Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you, first of all, for coming to share your wisdom with us today. I have a quick question for you as mentors, for people like me. I'm a PhD student in neurological sciences at the Montreal Neurological Institute, and science education is near and dear to my heart. And one thing I find really difficult is that in my interactions with younger students that I'm encouraging to go into science, because I strongly believe in science literacy, I struggle because I see my colleagues graduate with PhDs, and I see Big Pharma closing out of Montreal, and I see the lack of jobs for scientists in Montreal, and I have this kind of, I really am kind of torn. I want young students to go into science, but at the same time, the Minister for Science and Technology of Canada is a creationist, I really, it's difficult to encourage people to go into a field when you are not certain that there will be amazing jobs for them. And I was wondering if you could comment on that. Perhaps it would help some of the other scientists in the audience like me who find it kind of difficult to be going into this workforce now in such a political climate in science.
Wonderful. So we're looking for some big inspiration. Sylvia.
I used to be the science program coordinator at Dawson. And so at open house, I'd meet thousands of parents. And they all wanted their children to go into science, to become doctors or engineers. And it always bothered me because Canada has a deficit of students in science technologies. Science isn't only at the top. We also need a lot of people who are passionate and interested in working science. So when you're talking about, when you asked your question, I wasn't sure what level you're talking about. One of the things that may be a policy issue here in Quebec, we need to develop an understanding for and a love of technology. Not everybody has to have a PhD to be, quote, a scientist. I always remember we had the Canada Space Agency on our advisory committee, and somebody mentioned something, how can we get more astronauts? And she said, we don't need more astronauts. We need more people to work at the lower level to develop the support systems and the technology for those few astronauts. And I think here in Quebec, we don't value technology enough. And at the career programs, there are wonderful career programs for students in electronics and medical technology, etc. And we need more people interested in those fields.
Joanne?
I do agree. I won't add much because she's right. We have a tendency to think scientists are the ones who have the PhDs or the masters, or at least a BSc, okay? But it's just that what I often say to, for instance, in-service teachers at the primary level, they are scientists. Because when you look at all the skills and the competencies that one needs to be a scientist, it's the same thing as being an educator, okay? So, because science is about inquiry, about understanding, and we do that every day even when we want to find what we're going to put on, Okay, we check on the weather, we check on who we're going to see during the day. So, but I think that the best thing to do is to when you're passionate about your own field, be yourself. Okay, be yourself. They're going to pick up. Some are going to pick up on you, some won't. Okay, because we're not meant to be everything. Has anyone heard about this, the Rose Report?
Yes,
Anyone
yes,
heard about
absolutely
the
fabulous.
Rose? It's a fabulous report. It's a big, it's a huge research which has been done by Swedes, if I'm not mistaken. Go on the
And
web
England as well.
Yeah, well, it's big because what they did is that they interviewed 1,000 students in 33 countries, 15 years old, and they were given not questionnaires, they were statements, and they had to, it was on a Likert scale, if they agreed or not. And what came out from this study, and I do encourage you to go on the web and just look up Rose Report and presentation. There's one in English. It's flabbergasting. And what we found out is that because they did over 30 countries, some from the developed countries and some from the underdeveloped, and the interest in science is the highest in the underdeveloped countries, not in the developed countries. And we were very much surprised. We went, what? They're not interested in science. They do agree that it is important, but them going there, nah. And what came out also from this report is the fact that girls are very interested in subjects which touch biology, nature, chemistry, well, the nurturing, okay? Boys are very interested in everything that's engineering, mechanics, and explosions. Okay? So when you do teach, and you have girls and boys, fix it so that you have biomedical and explosion at the same time. Okay? So you put them together.
Cells. Huh? Gore cells.
Gore cells, yeah. And you'll see there's a difference. They do catch on, because I've tried it afterward and it does work. And also they found out that the subject, which is, there's a consensus all over the planet, okay, is about the mysteries, any mystery, but most specifically about the mystery of space. This is something that you see all over the planet in developed and underdeveloped with girls and boys. I do encourage you to see this. This report is really amazing.
Can I just add something to that report?
Yeah, go ahead.
They also did follow-up studies in Sweden on how to improve interest in science. And what they came up was camping expeditions, because the students are now divorced from nature. I was always shocked when a few years ago we had a lab on different fruits and vegetables, and one of the students had never seen a potato before. She'd seen French fries, but never the potato. And so that's another thing. One of the things they found that increased students' interest in science was a relationship with the natural world.
All right.
There's just one thing. I was very surprised last May. I was in the classroom, Sec 1, and we were talking about leather. And, for instance, leather shoes, okay? Handbags. Well, did you know that the kids did not know that it was cowhide? I was flabbergasted, okay? And they went, oh, yuck. So you see the level where they are? Sec 1.
All right, I'm going to open up to the next question. We've got a little lineup for me here, so we'll keep rolling here. And I'll ask Tino. Oh, no, don't worry. You can look at me, and if I'm going like this, then you can. Please.
Hi. I'd like to start by thanking you all for what you do, because I think science education is phenomenally important. While not everyone needs to be a scientist, it's helpful if everyone can at least sometimes think like one. But my question is not as open-ended as the other ones, I guess, so maybe it'll be a quick answer. I'm just wondering how much computers education is going on. I know, for example, Estonia recently started teaching programming starting in grade 1 all the way through to help encourage computer literacy, and probably not to the same extent here, but what we're working on towards that. It's something I wish I did better.
So, Tino,
computer education has changed a lot. I mean, it was probably introduced in the early to mid 80s, and the emphasis was very much on programming. And that was at a time when the programmers were important because there were very few programmers. Now, increasingly, the emphasis has been on the application of the programs, of the tool. And it is not taught, at least not in the youth sector, but I mean elementary, secondary, it is not taught as a course, a subject. You know, you don't see something like computer science in anybody's schedule. Rather, it's taught as a skill. And it's a skill that touches upon many. It is a tool, and it has found its place as just that, a tool. It's one of those skills that are taught in many and most of the subjects. I assume it's handled very well in the sciences because, you know, there's the correlation to technology. But let me tell you that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I do know that in the social sciences and history, we use the technology a lot, both as a source of information and as well in the delivery. I don't mean just the delivery of the teacher, I mean the delivery of student presentations and also in organizing students' knowledge. You know, the computer can handle a lot of information, allowing the student to focus on the result of that information, which is knowledge, understanding, and subsequent application. But computer as a course per se is rather old school.
I have to say, can I add to that? I've always been very disappointed in the lack of computer science education at the Seiler level. Yes, they teach applications. Our students are great at Excel and all sorts of programs. But you talk about genetic algorithms, you talk about artificial life, you talk about the science of computer science, they know very little. I know at Dawson we introduced a new course a few years ago that is computer programming for science and engineering. And the emphasis behind it wasn't so much the programming, but the thinking that goes place when you start thinking of systems and models that I think are really important. If you go to many biology labs today, they're on computers. They're not doing traditional dissections anymore. They're looking at a systems approach. They're using models, etc., which is a mindset that I think we need to start introducing into our science programs. I know in the States, that's one of the things that they've encouraged us to begin developing an idea of systems in science, rather than the piecemeal science that we used to teach.
Do you know, sorry, just a very quick follow-up, do you know if there's any sort of push towards that happening at the policy or sort of overarching curriculum level? Because that's exactly the kind of thing that I wish I had had more of. Because now I have to work with all these complicated programs that I don't understand at all.
I don't think so.
Gale?
It has been recommended, by the way, but I don't think it's been put in policy yet.
Gale, did you want to add anything to this?
No, I was just responding to his question, saying no.
There's one thing that's got to be clear with the word technology, because being a kind of globetrotter, I found that the perception of the word technology is not the same. Okay. Once you go outside Quebec technology is a lot, or outside Quebec is more ITC, communication technology, ICT. Okay, it's more that. In Quebec, when we talk about technology, the course science and technology for the elementary and the secondary, it's about mechanisms, it's about materials, it's about forces, it's about these things. So regarding the primary and the secondary level, mainly it's more of the ICT is more of a user, okay, to learn how to use Excel, to learn how to use PowerPoint. Some schools at the high school level start using computerized or digitalized data loggers, okay, that are getting fancier and fancier. But they're starting because, like at Dawson, they're very well equipped. They have to know how to use it. And but we have a tendency to think that the kids know everything. They know how to do it. They don't. They don't know. They don't know. They know how to play Warcraft. But doing a PowerPoint or things like that, not that much. So at most.
Thank you for being patient. You stood up earlier and wanted back up. Please.
No problem. I have a question about qualifications and training of teachers. And one conversation that I've had with many teachers and with many students is about the fact that to teach in the sciences, to teach in, say, physics, in Quebec in high school, one who has a physics degree isn't qualified to teach physics. One has to have an education degree. And that education degree often includes a component of the subject matter in which the teacher has to be the specialist in, but it's often introductory level courses, maybe 30 credits, whereas a full degree in chemistry or physics is 70 to 90 credits. And many teachers have said to me in conversations that they feel that we're getting the balance wrong, and that there needs to be more of an emphasis on the actual subject matter that one is teaching and less of an emphasis on the education theory. So the first question that I have is, what does the panel feel about that? How can you reflect on that for a moment? The more kind of controversial aspect of this is there's a perception, and I don't know if it's accurate, that maybe some of those teachers who are being certified and qualified taking the introductory level courses might not actually succeed in the advanced level courses. And that's kind of a disturbing perception. I don't know if it's accurate, but could you reflect on this?
Gale, I'm gonna start with you.
Yeah, that's my baby.
I thought you were gonna like right here.
Yeah, well, first of all, the Quebec curriculum is quite unusual in that it's interdisciplinary, meaning teachers have to teach interrelated topics from a physical science standpoint, a life science standpoint, and so on, up through grade 10. Grade 11 is the only place where there are dedicated chemistry and physics courses that are set by the Quebec curriculum. So, because of that, we have adjusted our teacher ed program in the last few years. I've been at McGill 5 years. So in the last 5 years, we've adjusted our teacher ed program in response to that. Before that, it was people picked an area. You got certified in, you took mainly physics or you took mainly chemistry or so on. So we've had to adjust to that policy change. And that means that so the teachers do take a broader range of topics and therefore don't get to 400 level topics in 400 level courses. But my personal opinion is that that is not necessarily a problem. I think that the other thing you have to remember is that teaching is a professional, intellectually rigorous profession. It's intellectually rigorous work which requires specialized knowledge that knowing a content area does not necessarily provide you with. So it's important that people have lots of opportunities to acquire the kinds of skills and practices and knowledge that's related to what it is that they're teaching. In education, they talk about content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and then pedagogical content knowledge, which is being able to think about a physics topic or a biology topic and think about how can I help students develop a robust understanding of that? And because that's not trivial, and it's not about explaining to them, because that's not how people learn. People learn through opportunities to construct their own knowledge. If you think about something that you know how to do well, and how you came to know how to do that well, or understand well, it was repeated opportunities to make sense of it, to do things with that knowledge, to establish that knowledge, to build that knowledge. And so just telling somebody something or being able to explain it well doesn't necessarily help people learn. So what I'm saying is in our teacher ed program, we try to strike up a balance between that. In Quebec now, we actually do have a new program, finally. For a long while, what you said was true, that in order for someone to be certified to teach in Quebec, you have to have a Bachelor of Education. That's actually now changed. There's a new program that McGill has, and some of the other universities have it as well. Ours is called the MATL program, Masters of Arts in Teaching and Learning, which is for people who already have a degree in, for example, science, and they come and do either a part-time or a full-time program, and they get a Masters of Arts in Teaching and Learning and a teacher certification. The difficulty with that is people come with traditional backgrounds, for example, a physics major or a chemistry major, and in 8th grade they are teaching environmental kinds of topics. So it's difficult to envision how to best prepare science teachers, especially when there's a shortage of science teachers, and there's projected shortages of science teachers. I have the data here. If anyone wants to look at it from MELS, they're projecting for the next 5 years there will be a shortage, even in the Anglophone sector in Quebec. So it's trying to balance, kind of all of that. Is that? Yeah.
Tino, you wanted to make a quick addition.
Along the same lines, with an emphasis on policy, the policy did shift, and in fact, the pivotal year was just around 1995. And it begs the question along the same lines, and begs the question: do you teach the subject, or do you teach the student? And I think that's a false dichotomy. You teach the subject to the student, but it is a question of emphasis. You know, many things are zero sum, and in a program of 90 as it used to be, or 120 credits, that's the BEd program. You know, out of 120 credits, you got to divide these credits between, or rather, among a number of subjects, and you know, some are content specific, and others are pedagogical, and then you have a number of other subjects, including 3 credits in policy. And therefore, you know, there's only so much you can do, and then it becomes a question of emphasis. And, you know, the best teachers are the ones who have a strong disciplinary background, and as well, strong pedagogical skills, and you don't get better than that. But we are looking at a pendulum that swung from the subject to the student, and now I think, hopefully, resting somewhere in between.
I'm going to move it on to the next question to make sure we have time for all of them. Please.
It seems to me that there's one aspect of science education that's in conflict with the values of science, and that's assessment and evaluation. It's in science, things are open-ended, you don't know the answer, and you know, many of the classes I've had where I've learned the most is when you're given a problem that not even the professor knows the answer to, and you just let go to work on it. You know, conflicts with our values, and I think, you know, the 50% cheating rate that you mentioned is because, bottom line, you know, if you're a student and it comes down to it, you're going to have to, you know, cheat to get the thing, because what matters is the answer. I was just wondering is there any programs or ideas for alternative ways of assessing and evaluating students in science, especially since it also seems to guide teachers and the curriculum that they choose away from maybe what Quebec wants, or, you know, is there any alternative?
Wonderful. We'll see everyone jump in. Should I do a line? I'll start with Gale at the end.
I'll be quick. There are models for alternative ways of assessment. There are performance assessments. There are what they call authentic assessments. There's problem-based assessments, and so there are models. Some teachers and places use them more than others, but you're right that and what we find in work with practicing teachers at secondary level, at the CJEP level, at the university level, the pressure to prepare students to pass certain kinds of assessments is so strong. And so we run up against that continuum. So the answer is there are models for alternative types of assessment. Many teachers use them during the semester and then like hit the students with the big traditional, you know, whammo exam at the end. But there are models. It's just the system. It's fighting a paradigm that's been there for a long time. That's the way you assess science in particular.
The pressure coming from where?
The pressure's coming from, well, at different levels, it's coming from different places. At the secondary level, the students have to take the provincial exams to get their high school leaving certificate. And yeah, so the pressure, and it's kind of cyclical. Well, I have to give them this kind of exam because this is what they're going to get in CJEP. In CJEP, I have to give them this kind of exam because this is what they're going to get at McGill. And so it's very, self-perpetuating.
I just want to answer your question. UQAM, their biology department is entirely problem-based. And so the students do not take the types of exams you're talking about. They're all open-ended, no right answer, long-term. They've had that program in place, I think now, 20 years, for a long period of time. And I think it's quite successful. One of the stages at Bois de Boulogne also had a problem-based learning science program. I think they stopped it for a while because students, for several reasons. The major reason is that you need to have policy changes. If you're going to have a system, like, for example, problem-based learning, you need to have students work in small groups over long periods of time. You can't have an hour and a half class on a problem-based learning. You need a 4 or 5 hour. You need to have the students work together. Everything changes, not just a class. And that's difficult to do. I know there's also policies in place. For example, all the Anglophone CEGEPs, I think, require the final science exams to be a common final. And so you need to have an exam that's produced by a department, over 10 people. And so even though you may want to do a different type of assessment, you can't. You're locked in by a policy. I was listening to the CBC the other day, and there was research that's been done, I think at MIT or Harvard, on the influence of incentives on performance. Basically, they were saying the higher the incentive when the task is mental, the lower the performance. And so I really worry about the effect that our way of assessment has on student learning. I think it's a major problem.
Joanne, please. Thank you for being patient.
Yes, I just want to mention the fact that at the end of Sec 4 with the exam, the ministry exam, yes, there is a part on knowledge, and about 60% of the exam is really multiple question stuff. But the rest are, yes, short answers, but the student now is not just, they don't need, like some say, vomit the answer, okay, just throw it out. They really have to think about it. They really have to get higher processes to be able to learn. Regarding evaluation, there's been kind of a shift lately because the reform wanted to evaluate only about competencies, but now we are mixing competencies and knowledge. However, there is a kind of misunderstanding in the field on what is knowledge, what is competency, what are competencies, how much do I do of what, and how do I do it. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of, optics readers going, that's not good for the, it's good for the teacher, very good for the teacher, but it's not very good for the student, unless questions are let's say, complete. But of course, the open-ended, we try to encourage the teachers to put together learning situations, because we're talking about learning and evaluation situations where they are open-ended. Okay, there is no one answer, because what is important for the student is the process. Because before, I remember when I did my studies, what it was important in the assessment was to have the right answer. Okay, 2 decimal points. But now it's not that. It's part of the evaluation, but it's the inquiry process. And we have to remember also that it is evaluation for learning. The students should get feedback. But I find, if I compare to previously, because we were teaching by objectives, and we're talking about formative assessment and summative assessment in English, and pretty much the same, okay? It's pretty much the same, other words, but it's just a formative assessment is to help the student tell them, hey, this is where you're strong, this is where you are weak. Let's work together on the weak points. Works well. Doesn't work well, depends on the teacher and depends on the students. There's some parts you can't control.
Comment? Sure. We'll go to the final question on our end. Thank you for standing the whole time.
Very quickly, in any program, evaluation becomes its Achilles heel, but it shouldn't have to be so, okay? Another problem, and we made some reference to provincial exams or high-stakes exams or exams that are administered widely. Those are the hardest exams to write. In fact, the easiest evaluation is the one that is applied by the teacher in her or his classroom, because it's in context, it's specific, and the more you move away, the more you move the developer of an evaluation from the classroom, harder it becomes to write, and the less fair it becomes to the students. Now, we can debate, the value of these provincial exams, and I do so with teachers in the system all the time, and I say, look, they are high stakes and they count. These students are going to apply for CJEP, and there's a reality you cannot deny. So make sure that all your other evaluations are not like this exam, so at least there's balance. And the comment I get back all the time is, but how am I going to prepare? And I'm not suggesting that students and with their teachers don't practice. So I say, well, practice, show them the exam. There's plenty of old exams. Show them the exam. Show them what they're going to be up against. But when you evaluate so that students get the feedback, because it's not just of learning but for learning, make sure that you counter that exam by evaluations that are fair, in context, and in situ in your classroom.
Thank you very much. And then we'll wrap it up with maybe a final question or comment, depending on where we are for me.
Yeah, okay, so mine's a question, I guess, about the possible tension between teaching for the purpose of forming future scientists or professionals who are technicians and giving, citizens an ability to assess scientific information that's presented to them. And I'm wondering, in looking at the curriculum and the way the competencies are designed, were these sort of two goals measured, and how are they weighed one against the other? Are they in tension, or are they actually not in competition with each other?
Great, please.
Well, I am speaking for the social sciences, okay? And in fact, the third competency in the social sciences is citizenship. Now, citizenship is how the competency enters the tail end of what is very important in the social sciences, and I do believe it's important in all the other subjects as well, and that is civics. Civics is what students learn in school. Citizenship is how they apply that learning. We sometimes describe citizenship as responsible civics. So it ends with that, and of course, if we look at the other two competencies in the social sciences, by and large, the first one is an understanding, knowledge. The second one is an application, that is the application of that knowledge, and that's why I say the first one is understanding, the second one is application, and the third one is the rationale or reason. But I do believe in, in this policy, in this program,